Ukraine has passed a new education law, and we have with us Igor Samokhin, who is the education policy expert from CEDAW think tank, and he's with us to explain both what changes and concerns offer the effect of this reform on the minority. So, Igor, just before we start, I have to explain that by many accounts, the reform has much to offer: higher salaries for teachers, more local control of schools and curriculum improvements. It was also developed with the active participation of civil society and incorporates input from the public. But one aspect of the law is causing controversy: language. The bill would require all students to study in the Ukrainian language after the 4th grade and would eliminate minority language schools. That's how it's said. This has sparked conflict with some of the neighboring countries who are concerned for their co-ethnics in Ukraine. It also has provoked debates with Ukraine among teachers, parents, and even students. That is all in our program. But first of all, explain us what is this law about?
Yeah, thank you. Good evening. The law on education is the main law on education in Ukraine, which covers all levels of education, starting from primary and to higher education. It is not the only law that regulates education in Ukraine, but it is
What's new there? What's new?
Yeah, the new things are more control to the localities, more autonomy for schools, more autonomy for teachers, more possibilities for teachers to improve their curricula, to improve their own education, less control over schools from local government, and more governing bodies which consist of parents and other persons in localities who are stakeholders in these schools.
What was the role of the civil society in creating it?
Yes,
I think that would probably the reason why there was there was this kind of huge support of this law by Ukrainians, despite the language issue.
Yes, there was a big support in media, in social media, and it was seen as a landmark reform for education in Ukraine, because many NGOs, including our NGO, CEDAW think tank, took part in advising government on writing this law, in promoting specific articles of this law, on promoting specific progressive reforms that are contained in this law. So this law, more than many others, is based on civil society.
Yes, so with that, we also spoke to Oksana Makarenko, an advisor to the Minister of Education and Science, and she explained what the goals of the education reform, how they are addressed, and also answered on the concern regarding the language, which would be the part of this discussion later.
Ukraine is not the only country currently undergoing the crisis of educational systems. The whole world is now looking for ways to reform and renovate education, since we have new technologies, new values, new requirements by employers in the market. The old Ukrainian education system does not help children become successful in today's world. Besides this, our education system, especially in the middle classes, has not had any reforms for over a century. The same teaching methods have been used for decades. The teacher's role has changed today. It is no longer just to transfer knowledge from books to kids, but to form the core knowledge so that a child will be able to use it in different life situations in the future. And this law includes mechanism that makes this possible: qualification agencies, and their role is to gather job requirements from the market and convert them into educational standards. Children can become innovators only if the surroundings allow them to make mistakes. Surroundings where kids can experiment, do research, make hypotheses, and then prove or disprove them, and where they have tools for that, including a developed intuition. It's important for us to start treating teachers differently and to change their motivation to allow their creativity to flow. And this system allows that, up to the point that teachers are allowed to pick which books they want to use in teaching and how long to dedicate to each subject. We are not deluded with regards to the time period this reform will take. That's why we've stretched it over 10 years. It will be put into action from 2018 onwards, so the first primary school kids to experience it will probably be those graduated in the year 2029-2030.
One of the most discussed aspects of the reform is that it implies that the languages of minorities can now only be used to teach kids in grades 1 through 4. What grounds did you have for this particular decision, and what will happen to the minority languages after 4th grade?
This is, of course, a political question that got a little painful. We have an objective situation with Ukrainian, our national language, needing protection. For example, 70% of kids who graduated from minority language schools in Beregovo in Zakarpattia get around 1 to 3 out of 12 points in their Ukrainian language admission exam. This shows that Ukrainian citizens graduating from minority language schools virtually don't know the national language. In result, they have limited choice of universities to go to, because most universities teach in Ukrainian and they cannot work at most state positions in the future. This law stays within the framework of the Constitution of Ukraine that guarantees ethnic minorities the right to study their native language. It also doesn't violate the document on regional languages that was implemented by the European Union and ratified by Ukraine. At the same time, it helps Ukrainian language spread in schools.
Is the Ministry of Education prepared for the protests of Russian and Hungarian speakers in the south and east of Ukraine and the Zakarpattia region? Because as far as I remember, the statistics say that around 200,000 students study in Russian, so this can anger parents. Is there a mechanism for dealing with this?
I know that there are parents who don't know Ukrainian themselves, and they are worried that they won't be able to help their children with homework, and that's why they chose Russian language schools for their kids. And there are those who, on the contrary, demand for more Ukrainian language to be taught in school, despite the fact that they can't speak it themselves, and they just want their children to know the national language. There are many such parents in the south and east of Ukraine. Yes, it's being perceived as a painful, problematic question, but I think that people have accepted it, and now they try to see what they need to do next rather than just protest.
So as far we can explain that it was highly supported by the civil society due some kind of the positive changes, and probably that was maybe the part why there was not much criticism inside of Ukraine for this law. So can you elaborate a bit on more, and how comes then this language issue had appeared?
Yes, the law overall is has a huge support in Ukraine. Of course, there is also a controversial issue of 12-year school, which is not supported by many parents in Ukraine because they believe that children do not have to spend that many years in school, but it is by experts and by European governments, it is generally considered that 12 years is a better time frame to cover all that is needed to be covered in school, and that children can be more adult and more grown up when they finish the school. So it is partly controversial in Ukraine. But overall, the thing that I thought about, more autonomy, more local control, more parents' control, and so on, these things, and also higher salaries for teachers, which are to be minimum 3 minimum Ukrainian salaries. So it's like even the teacher who just begins to teach, he will have 3 times more bigger salary than the unskilled worker.
And the teachers were always underpaid in Ukraine, so of course there is the support of that particular policy, but my colleagues from Hromadske also went to the schools, and especially to the Russian language schools. That is where there is a lot of interest, and talked to the students and parents. Some of them believe the reform will cause the problems, but others believe the change is doable and even important.
Starting next year, Ukraine will implement a new education reform that will change how teachers teach and students study. Many aspects of the reform are fairly uncontroversial, but one is provoking controversy on an international level. According to the reform, minority languages can only be used to teach until the 4th grade. In practice, this means there will no longer be separate schools where the primary language of instruction is anything other than Ukrainian. Instead, minority language schools must transition to a new program. Tatiana Fedunova, director of Kiev Russian Language School number 85, says that such a transition will prove difficult for her students.
This school has been teaching in Russian throughout the entire history. Russian language has been used since the school was founded in 1956. Our students are of more than 30 nationalities and backgrounds, foreigners, children of diplomats whose professional interests lie in Kiev, and we also all communicate in Russian here.
Supporters of the reform say that it will help students prepare for the Ukrainian language component of the compulsory university entrance exam. In their opinion, this exam is always a challenge for students who studied in languages other than Ukrainian. But Fedunova doesn't agree and says this has never been an issue before.
I'm very proud of how well our children performed on their entrance examinations. First of all, they all choose to do their exams in the Ukrainian language as opposed to Russian. And for a school with Russian as a medium of instruction, that's a great result. Absolutely all of them passed their exams in Ukrainian with flying colors.
But Anna Boyko, the director of another Russian language school, says that teachers will be happy to switch to Ukrainian.
I will not have any problems with starting to teach in Ukrainian. This is not our biggest worry at the moment. Ukrainian language has been taught here, the children all know it, we follow Ukrainian traditions, holidays and events are all held in Ukrainian.
It seems like the biggest naysayers of this new education reform are parents. They say they want their children to graduate from a Russian language school and say they have legitimate reasons.
Ukraine is particularly located in the center of Europe, connecting Europe's east and west. We carry both Eastern and Western cultures, and it's great when we can speak the language of our neighbor. I think knowing Russian for the sake of just speaking is not enough. Children need to know the grammar and be able to write well. A Russian school gives children an equal amount of language skills in Ukrainian and Russian. In my opinion, if we consider the country an aggressor, then completely different measures should be applied. It's unreasonable to apply the same rule to the language. If there is a war with the US tomorrow, would that mean that we need to stop learning English?
Many people I've talked with say they want to move to a different country with their children, and trust me, these people are not stupid, they have university degrees. This reform will prove to be a bad decision for Ukraine. Despite the parents' criticism, the children themselves seem ready to switch to Ukrainian. They acknowledge there are difficulties, but they also believe that this is a necessary step.
Our language of instruction was Russian, so it will be hard for us to switch to Ukrainian, especially because some scientific subjects have very specific terms. But we need to do this because we live and study in Ukraine, and we will work here in the future too.
So here, can you explain? So if that law had been widely discussed among the civil society, in particular everything connected to education, not the language, there was not much discussion about the language, or were any different communities consulted? What should people know about that?
Yeah, the thing is that the education law, it went through 2 readings in the Rada before it was approved by the Rada, and not only it can be a false impression that it was written by NGOs and totally approved by NGOs in all its parts. It was partly rewritten and amended by politicians, and I think that language issue, its roots in the politicians of Ukraine, because there is the coalition in the Ukrainian Rada. It is strongly pro-Ukrainian language, and it was expected that they would would amend this law in a more controversial way.
And I would like to bring the quotes from the Romanian Prime Minister, who even had cancelled his visit to Ukraine, as well the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Hungary. That's what they've said.
We urge the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights to start an investigation in connection with the law adopted in Ukraine and to use all means to stop violations of minority rights by this new law. When we learned of this law, I canceled my visit to Ukraine, and I also came out against the visit by the Speaker of the Ukrainian Parliament, scheduled for the end of September, in order to send a strong diplomatic signal. Canceling a presidential visit is an extremely powerful signal. I told him directly that this visit will not happen until progress is made on the education law.
And now, please watch the answer of the Ukrainian Minister of Foreign Affairs. We've asked this question.
First of all, the critics are speaking with regard to the interpretation, but not with regard to the law itself. I discussed with Lilia Grinevich all the details of this law thoroughly, and most importantly, its realization. What we propose is just the preservation of education in the languages of minorities. That's, first of all, an international duty, but it's something we need to do. But we also need to make sure that our citizens know Ukrainian to a decent standard so that they have the future in Ukraine, so that they could attend our universities and have jobs. I think I've said in an interview before that I visited the Hungarian consulate once, where I went downstairs and greeted everyone. Some people smiled at me and couldn't say anything back because they didn't know Ukrainian, hence why I spoke with all the ministers, had discussions. We want to add education in Ukrainian and not take away education in minority languages, and we are going to directly do that. Additionally, we are also going to talk with our Romanian and Hungarian partners. Now there are questions from the Bulgarians and others. Even the Hungarians have written a statement saying that now the Hungarian university in Ukraine will close. We're all laughing because nobody's going to close anything. Or there won't be any more education in schools. I say, how's that possible? You have the possibility to study biology in Hungarian, but you should know the terminology in Ukrainian to have a future in Ukraine. I think that our discussion will lead to understanding, but everybody has internal politics. Somebody tries to communicate, somebody tries to use internal politics. We will continue to work on it. The question is very important. Every citizen of Ukraine must know Ukrainian.
So this graph explains what we have, how many people it affects. We can say that 400,000 children from national minorities use their native language as medium of instruction today. Ukrainian language as the subject is taught for 2 hours per week in a lot of cases. What else we should probably mention?
Yes, that the 2 hours per week is a very small amount of time, and it is not enough for a profound knowledge of the language and ability to speak in it and to use it in society.
I'll ask to bring another graph, which also shows which communities its affect. We can speak about the people. These are we can have the bit more than 2,000 students studying in the Moldovan language, then later Polish. Of course, the largest community is 300,000 students studying in the Russian languages. Then, of course, Romanian and Hungarian is up to 16,000 people. But really, Igor, there is a question that it's really, instead of the multi-ethnic country, some kind of we are building the country with the one ethnic group of Ukrainians. So what would be your answer on that? And I also ask to bring the other chart.
Yes, I would not say that it will be a monolingual country that only Ukrainian will be used, because the issue in this law is to make Ukrainian language more taught and to provide for these children to know Ukrainian language better before they enter workforce or university, because currently, if children who study in their native language and they study Ukrainian just 2 hours per week, they cannot basically enter university, because university is in Ukrainian official language.
So what will happen? That's what we understand. And this is the graph which is provided by Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine, that children from national minorities can obtain education in their native language in preschool. And as well, there is a possibility to study several subject in native language. But still, it's kind of the choice of the state, not of the people.
Yes and no, because of course everybody would like to be taught in their native language, and because it is easier, it is more convenient. But for the state, the issue is that these children, they are not able to enter the Ukrainian society fully integrated in it. So as I see this reform, it is an attempt to provide for better integration of national minorities in Ukrainian society, but without assimilation, because they will study their language, they will study in their language before 10 years, so they will not forget their language or something like that. So I would not say that it is like total assimilation.
Igor, thanks a lot. Igor Samokhin is the analyst for education policy at CEDAW think tank, but we promise to you that we will follow this topic, and we are about to invite the representative of the ministry, the representative who are opposing this law, and also talk to some of the communities. So we are with this topic, and thanks a lot for being with us. And I urge you to go to our webpage en.hromadske.ua, and there you can see the full version of our programs, of our shows, and the interviews, and you can also go to the social networks and search Hromadske International at Facebook and Twitter. That what we would like to give you, and I'll be back in a second.
Mm-hmm.